would you prefer a wedding where the preacher who sings Simon and Garfunkel songs while holding an acoustic guitar instead of a Bible, or would you rather get married in a wedding with a chapel in kilts and the only music being from a bagpipe player doing high knee steps?
Oh. At this point, I'm trying to imagine just having a physical wedding at all. But if that's the case, I think I want the bagpipes.
Frankie's going bagpipes. What about you, Steve?
I'm feeling a little. I think I'll take the. I'll take the April Come She Will on acoustic. Very mellow. I think I could kind of relax to that. The bagpipes might be a little too much for me.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, so we're here today. We are doing a special revival episode of Split Picks. It's been a while. So I'm Craig Wright. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Split Tooth Media, and I'm being joined today by filmmaker and film teacher Steve Collins. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, glad to have you. And we're also being joined by Frankie Vanaria, who's another film scholar and teacher at Boston University. Frankie, how are you today?
I'm good, guys. Glad to be here with both of you.
Yeah, it's, weird days, so it's good to have something to look forward to. So, all right, so Steve, you're a filmmaker, but sounds like during lockdown you've been writing about other people's films a lot. So I'm just curious what that's been like for you and what you've taken away from that.
Well, yeah, I'm a filmmaker, so usually in my spare time I'm writing scripts. But I think the lockdown just encouraged me to do a little more writing on films I love because I didn't have any immediate plans to make something. And one of the films I've been wanting to kind of write or teach or do something with for years is Inside Llewyn Davis, which was one of my favorite films of the last, decade or so. Mm-hmm. And I think a film that didn't really get much. I don't know. It didn't seem to me. It seemed to me it was a little undervalued. Mm-hmm. In their canon and in the Coen Brothers canon, but also just in it was not. It was one of their lower grossing films. And so, but I've been enjoying writing on film quite a lot. It's just, I realize it's being a filmmaker is it's very hard to get money to get films going. It's a big pain in the butt to get a crew. Get a crew together, get all that stuff. Get locations, get lunch, and it is refreshing being able to get the more. Not instant satisfaction, but I guess a little more kind of a relaxing process of watching and writing and rewriting. So I found it interesting as another sort of vehicle to express my love of movies.
Cool. And Frankie, you are finishing up your PhD, and you're also teaching some classes. What's been going to school during all this been like?
Awkward, I would say, is the predominant emotion. Whether it's teaching over Zoom or teaching sort of half in the classroom, half over Zoom at the same time, it's hard to show movie clips that like technically all the students can access and that they all have the same audio and everything is working for them. So it's a little bit challenging when we run into technical problems, but students are always very smart and they pick up on things. And yeah, like Steve said, writing is a very relaxing, almost a therapeutic way to be living in the pandemic and be thinking about movies at the same time. And it's just been nice also to have students and kind of see how they process movies and kind of react to them.
All right. Well, we're here today because without knowledge of each other's work, you both turned in stories about the Coen Brothers films in the same week, both dealing with films that are completely different from one another and for for good measure, you both referenced Double Indemnity. So, Frankie, you chose Intolerable Cruelty. Steve, you wrote about Inside Llewyn Davis. Obviously, we're going to dive into more detail, but briefly, I'm just curious what drew both of you to write about these films now. And Steve, why don't we start with you, because we'll go chronologically and do Intolerable Cruelty first.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I think it's a movie that I don't think got quite enough love, and I think for me particularly, I think the reason I responded to it so deeply is, well, I mean, one, it is about a struggling artist, so I suppose I have, as a filmmaker, I have an extra sort of susceptibility to that. But I actually was interested in it because it was more emotionally open than a lot of their work. Really, all of their work. It really allows you to identify with a character and really feel for him in a way that they're often quite guarded about. And so, I think that's what made it sort of distinguishes it from other, their other films and their other great films, is that there's a kind of increased level of empathy you're allowed to enter in, and real sentiment that I found refreshing for them.
And then on the flip side, we have Intolerable Cruelty. Frankie, that's what you wrote about.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had a sort of, in first coming to it, I had a similar thought process as Steve. It was always a film that I felt was kind of overlooked in their work, that some people just not liking it or maybe just not knowing it, it never really got talked about in anything I had read about them. And the same is true of Llewyn Davis. But another part of why I came to it is because, I don't know, in my head, I just had the commercials for it always stuck in my head. And I don't even remember the commercials being that impressive or even memorable, but just, I remember it was 2003. I was 14 or something like that then. And, I was just getting to know film, and I was picking up all these different things. And from what I did know about the Coen Brothers at that young age, that seemed like a weird movie that they would be making. And I don't know, I eventually just came to it during the pandemic, and I said, this is kind of interesting. It has a lot of different modes. And that's about it.
Yeah, I think I was 9 years old when it came out. I'd never even heard of this movie before you pitched it, honestly. One thing that stuck out to me is this was originally slated to be directed by either Ron Howard or Jonathan Demme. How do you think this film might be different if one of those two was at the helm?
I feel like if Ron Howard had done it, it would have been an actual romantic comedy. Mm-hmm. And if Demme had done it, it would have been a film noir. So I think the Coens kind of knew that going into it and said, why don't we just have the best of both worlds and make something incoherent but interesting?
I found that's really interesting. I had no idea that they were up for it. I mean, I agree that certainly Howard, I think, would have found, probably tried to go after a little more of the romance, in it. He's much more of a kind of classical director. Demme, that's interesting. I mean, he could go film noir, but, he does have that side. I mean, Something Wild is another film that mixes tones. And it would have been interesting to see if he tried something like that. The Demme films of this period were... He wasn't really... I guess The Truth About Charlie, a very unsuccessful remake of Charade. He's doing something like that where he's, mixing romance with a kind of espionage thing. But it would have been interesting to see what Demme would have done with it.
According to Wikipedia, it said Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant would have been the leads. So, yeah.
I'm sort of interested. I mean, I'm actually interested what you remember of the ad campaign, because I remember the poster, and it really did look like not a Coen Brothers film. They, I think they used that shot in the elevator, and it looked like it could be with Katherine Hagel or something like that, a kind of a romantic comedy like that. And it doesn't really give you a flavor of the tone of the movie, because it is completely there. I mean, it fits completely with their style. There really is, very little departure or concession to a larger budget kind of movie, except for that the leads are, huge A-list actors.
Yeah, I think that image is really stuck in my head of Clooney just kind of longingly looking at Zeta Jones, and if I had not known that it was a Coen Brothers movie, it would make sense that those two actors were still in it, because Clooney can play that and Zeta Jones can play that, and I didn't know enough about film to really appreciate this at the time, but thinking back on it, even if it were like a Ron Howard or a Demi helming it, you could see, based on that image or based on that poster, or I imagine more ads, that it would be a more like self-conscious and dedicated homage to a screwball comedy of the 30s. And there are parts of that in there. But yeah, it just goes in different directions.
So, Frankie, in your essay, you compare this film to reality television, mainly because of the characters. They're just kind of terrible, just unlikable people. And you talk about the cheap entertainment they provide. You also relate it to just kind of vampiric predation, I guess. What's the link between the Coens, vampire lore, and reality TV here?
The way that I would put it is that there is just this sense that we're not able to get rid of these characters, in a similar way that you wouldn't be able to get rid of a vampire, because they're mostly immortal. To me, it just, I had mentioned about, being fairly young and when this movie came out in 2003, and I guess that cultural moment, that Bush era cultural moment, growing up in it, and again, not really being cognizant of what culture was or what high culture was or what was happening to culture at the time, but growing up at the birth of reality television, seeing all of this like really cheaply produced, really, I guess dumb is a bad word, but it just, I guess more neutrally, it's just not very thoughtful, or thought out. And just kind of seeing that we had the germ of that in the early 2000s, and it's only gotten worse. We obviously still have romantic television. It is... reality television. There's romantic television too. But just the dumbness or the lack of thoughtfulness has just metastasized throughout the culture even more, into, feature films and things like that. So yeah, I guess the vampiric element in is just this undead cultural product that won't let go of our imaginations.
So you talk about how the Coens films are often populated by insensitive, cruel, and idiotic characters. There are some interesting people in this movie. Obviously, George Clooney is a divorce lawyer who's in the pursuit of perfect white teeth. He's in court and he's talking about how, Attila the Hun and Henry VIII didn't just win, they destroyed. And he's... they're all about just trying to get like the most out of other people. So what do you see as just kind of because you mentioned this kind of spiraled into a greater reality TV. Not this movie specifically, but what can you say about this movie as a whole? Their main characters.
Yeah, they're just like you had mentioned, and I guess like I wrote, they're just awful people, but they're so much fun to see. Like when we first see Clooney in the film, like you had mentioned his teeth, and that's like the first thing that we see of him, and he's on he's driving along and he's on his, early 2000s cell phone and all of that. And, just, he's like a cheap politician almost when you first see him. Or like a used car salesman or something like that. He's just, Clooney plays it so well. He's just the kind of guy that you wouldn't want to be stuck in a room with because he would be constantly trying to sell you something. But if you're not in the room with him, it's kind of fun to watch him work and see how he jumps from one person and one thought to the next. And he always has some kind of an angle. And Marilyn, who is Catherine Zeta-Jones' character, she's much more polished and still calculating, is still always looking to work an angle, trying to work somebody over. But she's not as accessible as he is. And, that's part of the fun of the movie is that Clooney, or Miles, his name and his character's name, that he gets kind of roped in to this romantic noir subplot, and he gets waxed by this woman who is basically him. It's just how callous and shallow and dumb he is, so much so that he can't even really realize what's going on around him or have control of what's going on around him.
One thing that might be good to mention briefly is we entirely skipped the plot. Do you want to give us a quick mini rundown of what's going on in this movie?
Sure. So George Clooney plays this high profile divorce attorney in Beverly Hills, and he's sort of, like you were kind of mentioning, Craig, he has this ambition in him to be the best, and he's basically reached the summit of his abilities early on in the film, and he's kind of bored with what he's accomplished. He wants something else, and this is kind of where Marilyn comes in, who he meets in the first real case that we see at the start of the movie. He's representing her husband in court. She's on the other side, and he's just instantly drawn to her. But in that court case, he eventually wins for her husband. And Marilyn, who, if she has a job, it's marrying people and taking their money. She kind of sees Miles, is aware that he's totally smitten with her, and knows that she can use that to get revenge on him for winning in court. So that becomes part of the movie, is her, devising a ruse to get Miles to fall in love with her, so that they eventually kind of get married. And she then leaves Miles, who subsequently realizes that everything about Marilyn that he thought he liked was fake, but he still likes her. And so it's becomes then his effort to get revenge on her for tricking him. And yeah, it's just a constant swirl of them betraying each other and eventually coming back together in the end of the movie, and kind of running off into the sunset. But as I sort of write about in the essay, not really a believable ending that these two would actually fall in love. it can't be the romantic comedy of the 30s. They're too bad as people.
Okay. So now, one thing that stuck out to me with this movie, and so many of the Coen Brothers movies, is that they have these minor characters that often just go way too far. I mean, there's a divorce lawyer here who cries at weddings. There's a train enthusiast, and obviously the stereotypical sleazy hitman in a sweatsuit. Are there any characters you were not on board with here?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think for different reasons, I appreciated all of them. Not to say that I agree with all of them, morally, but I mean, it's a movie that really seems to relish seeing the extreme position that all of these characters are put in or get themselves into. I didn't talk about this much, but the Jeffrey Rush character at the start of the movie, who, it's a weird role to have him in as like a cameo for such like he has so little screen time, but that he pops up at the beginning, middle, and end of the movie as sort of like this, almost like an MC character telling us about the different moments or different transformations in these characters, or in their different experiences. He's just, he's a vile, crass TV soap opera producer, and there's really nothing good about him. He, at the start of the movie, he realizes his wife is cheating on him and tries to kill her and her lover. Then you see him later in the film, and he's without a home, literally living in the gutter, at which point Marilyn finds him and enlists him to help her deceive Miles. And then at the end of the film, he is a producer again for, I guess, like an America's Funniest Home Videos type show where you're watching people get caught cheating, which is a show sort of hosted by this other character. Gus Pelch played a great performance by Cedric the Entertainer, who at different points, Marilyn and Miles reach out to help them do some sort of devious activities to get one over on the other. So yeah, there's a lot of characters who I didn't like what they were doing, but it was fun to kind of see what happened to them.
Something I thought of, Frankie, reading your essay was, you mentioned it really is a comedy with a lot of film noir in it, qualities in it. It made me think of Wells's Touch of Evil, and the same kind of, that you would never call Wells never did a comedy and never should have, but he does have a very cynical sense of humor. And also visually and stylistically, they do have something in common, that kind of grotesquing of using a wide-angle lens and a kind of grotesquing of character that's done both visually and in the writing and and the casting. I think about in Touch of Evil, I forgot the name of the character, but the whatever the sort of night watchman or the handyman guy that shows up at the motel where Janet Leigh's being held and drugged. He really could be a Coen character, that kind of, right on the edge of grotesque. I would say in Wells is often over the edge of grotesque, but they're always right on the edge of grotesque. with these characters, but they do add eccentricity or an asthma inhaler to just kind of give it a little, they're just right on the, like a little coin balancing on the edge of like just a little humanity in these people.
No, it's funny that you mentioned that because I think my favorite scenes are when Miles goes to like it's the senior partner guy, the head of the firm, and he's basically like he's this decrepit old guy who can barely talk, and he's hooked up to this horrible machine with tubes coming out of him, and I mean it's just such a beautiful, insane, grotesque image of like what this horrible lawyer does, and he's like a Sheldon Adelson type character. Like, I mean, he just looks sickly. He looks just cursed by his profession, by implicitly like his wealth, and Miles sees that, and he's like you were saying, Steve, he's got that just enough humanity, both Miles and sort of seeing the decrepitness of this figure. And you can kind of see in Miles's face that he's like half aware that this is what his future is.
Yes.
But he doesn't quite get it. So I agree with you. The two sides, that coin that you were talking about.
It's really interesting that it is a matter of, it is a matter of directorial like emphasis, because you could take the same scenes and scoot them a little, away from that, and they do have a tendency to kind of go for the guttural or to go for the throat a little bit, and that that lawyer hooked up to all those tubes is like. is one of those where they're really going for revolting symbol of a corrupt system, and it does make it hard to go for the romance when they want to go for, and that is the issue with this movie is like, how do you then switch over to action? Because the movie does in script form build towards love and build towards ripping up the Massey prenup, the Massey prenup, for those listening who haven't seen it, is the prenuptial agreement, that is a great feat of legal work for divorce lawyers. But it does it makes it their instinct for kind of social satire, really going for the guttural, really can get in the way of the romance, and the balance of it. It'd be interesting what someone else would do, with this, because the script's really very tight. When I was watching it, I had just watched "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which is, I think by nature a little loose. It's the Odyssey, and it kind of rambles and wanders a bit. It's not, it's not going all over the place, but this is a very tightly constructed film in comparison. Anyway, I'm still sort of interested in this issue of if other people had, the what if other people had directed this.
So this movie comes at a really interesting time in their career because it's 2 films after "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" and 2 before "No Country for Old Men." I feel like the Coens so often jump between comedy and more serious works, and then sometimes alternating back and forth. But where do you guys feel they're at their strongest?
I've always felt they're strongest in their dramas, which always have humor in them. Even "No Country for Old Men," which is a Cormac McCarthy, one of the most hardcore, like, not funny kind of writers you could think of, like, with a very bleak worldview. There is humor in there. I mean, that performance of Javier Bardem's and the writing for that performance has some real humor in it. It's very wicked, but it's the kind of wicked you see in great film noir. So I tend to like their dramas a little better, but I was thrilled to watch this one again because I do think it's a little. I think it is under talked about, and it is there are major American film artists who have kind of redone. They did a sort of draft of the screwball comedy with Hudsucker Proxy, and now with a lot more success and experience under their belt, they've kind of gone back and done it. And I think it is much more successful than, financially, but also artistically. I think it's more successful than Hudsucker Proxy. It's definitely worth another look. But what do you think, Frankie? Are you on the comedy side? I have a good friend who really loves Burn After Reading and really does side more on the comedy.
Yeah, I guess for me, I always have trouble deciding which one is which for them.
Yes,
because like you had said, Steve.
Yeah.
Because there's so much humor even in their dramas, and even something like True Grit. You know, it has all, with Jeff Bridges, it has those great performances, and from Matt Damon and Haley Steinfeld. I don't laugh at a lot of movie comedies, but they make me laugh. The initial courtroom scene where at one point Marilyn's husband just gets up and starts screaming, "I just love trains." like that's just great. It's such a stupid line of dialogue, but it's performed so well. And just to keep banging that over the head, it's not particularly dark, it's not particularly existential. They just have a really good sense, to me, of like the comedic tone of a scene, in addition to being able to kind of smuggle in darkly comic lines or moments into otherwise dramatic scenes.
Or a wood chipper,
Which
it is actually, I think, their comedy is a testament of like how difficult it is to do comedy, because their sensibility is really vibrating at a very particular frequency, and when you're doing comedy, comedy is more subjective, and so bringing people into that is more challenging. And whereas drama, it's almost like you have more range. You can bring in a wider range of people into that. But it's like people who love Curb Your Enthusiasm and just like adore it, and but if you don't like it, if you find it too sour or too neurotic or too, it's like you can't argue with that person. There's no convincing them. They just don't respond to it. There's something about comedy and what we're able to laugh at, that when you're mixing in violence and ugliness, you have to be vibrating on their frequency, to get it. And I think that's why their comedies maybe are a little less popular. Though I found out later that this movie actually made a lot of money. It was $120 million.
It was also their most expensive movie at $60 million budget. I was kind of blown away by that.
Wow.
Well, those are some big stars there. I'm sure that had something to do with it. Yes. I think what's difficult as a lover of a lot of those old screwball comedies is this film really is almost like Trouble in Paradise, or almost The Lady Eve, or almost. But of course, it's the ways it's not are completely unique to them and their own, unique point of view. But if you love those movies, and especially if you're going in to the movie theater expecting something maybe more softer, it's a hard switch. Where if you go into, say, some of their other comedies like Raising Arizona or Burn After Reading, you're never expecting anything but what you're getting. I do think that for me, when I saw it in the theater, even though I was familiar with the Coen Brothers, I found there was something about putting all the elements of a romantic comedy together, and then playing George Clooney basically as a character actor instead of a leading man. It's very unique, but it does play with what you're kind of going in expecting. I found I enjoyed the film the second time more because I was looking at it more like as part of their work and less as I saw this preview or this poster and now I'm going into this movie. And I found it fits better. It's more intellectually interesting to look at how it fits into their work than it was for me the first time I saw it in the theater.
Now that you say it that way, I think that is my entire appreciation for it. To me, it is more, like you said, it's almost more of a Coen Brothers movie because I appreciate what they're doing more than it is that I'm expecting it to be an actual romantic comedy. I think that's a great point. Yeah, it's so true with Burn After Reading. You know that you're just getting bonkers stuff from them, working out whatever they had to work out after No Country for Old Men, whatever new artistic direction they needed to go down after that.
You don't think you're going to get a kiss at the end of that thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, well, I think that wraps up Intolerable Cruelty for now, so we'll be moving on to Inside Llewyn Davis next.
Hang me, oh hang me, I'll be dead and gone. Hang me, oh hang me, I'll be dead and gone.
All right, so I started watching Bob Dylan's Rolling Thunder review the other night.
Oh.
Everyone had told me how great the live footage is, but
I have not seen it yet. Oh, you're disappointed?
Oh no,
okay.
It's very good. We didn't finish it yet, but I was just surprised how rarely they'd actually show a full song.
Yes.
It's kind of strange, but especially in music-oriented films, does it bother you when they don't show a full song?
Yeah, it does. I'm doing some writing on artists and art on film. So, films about songwriters, films about painters, that kind of thing. And so I've been looking at a lot of them lately. I was one that was frustrating. I was watching Songwriter, which is it's an early 80s film with Chris Christopherson and Willie Nelson. It's directed by Alan Rudolph. And I was just getting irritated with it as they kind of do these montages of shows and don't have the confidence to let a song play and actually figure out how to integrate it into the narrative, but instead kind of hop through shows. It's a real hard thing to do and figure out how to do. And one of the reasons I think this is such a successful integration of music and narrative, because they really understand what the songs are. They really chose them very carefully, working with T-Bone Burnett, who has a encyclopedic knowledge of American folk music, and they as filmmakers are at the point in their career where they're so confident in how to blend song with film story, song with image.
Mm-hmm. So, Steve, I just have to say your films use music really well. I just really appreciate the way you use music. I'm just curious what you think is some of the keys to using music with film.
Well, I mean, when I started making films, like in high school, I just loved music so much I would just slap in anything, and I used music very poorly. I was into the Feelies, and I would throw in the Feelies. I was into the Talking Heads, and I would throw in the And so I think unlearning that, unlearning that was a big part of it. That, I learned that you have to think about how the song is going to interact with the image. And you have to think, and this movie in particular has, a key actor who is a singer. And that makes a total difference, rather than a movie where Oscar Isaac, rides over the Golden Gate Bridge to the sound of, Alanis Morissette or something, covering over the drudge of the travel montage, so I think to me the key is really thinking of them as separate things that have, like a marriage, like that you have to match up very carefully. You can't just put any two people together in a room, and you can't just put any image with any sound. You have to really think about how they interact with each other and what the audience is supposed to do with that connection, or else you just get noise. You get feedback. And I, being a teacher also, I see that mistake that I made when I was a young filmmaker being made, every semester, because, and that's their right to make it, as it was mine, because it's very seductive music, because it's so powerful. It's very seductive to put it on top of your film, especially when you're just learning how to make films, and maybe the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or whatever song you're putting on it are maybe of higher quality than what you're making. It's very, seductive.
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the most interesting things about Inside Llewyn Davis is that really the only music is on stage being performed by people. There's no soundtrack.
Yeah.
What makes this use of music so convincing in the movie?
Or they made a real risk, casting Oscar Isaac. This is 2013, so he really, he did not really have a persona, or he was an unknown. He was an actor, he was working, but no one would be able to recognize him. Now he's, I think he's sort of known as one of the, our generation's Al Pacino, he's known as like one of the real quality actors, and it's really this movie that made his whole reputation. So their commitment to casting him was not because they just wanted to cast an unknown. It was because he could play the guitar and sing. Right. And that's one of the big problems for musical films, is that we don't really have the talent base necessarily of musical performers the way we did in like the vaudeville era, where everyone had to be able to pull off a song. And then I think for the rest of it, I would think they would give a lot of credit to T-Bone Burnett, who also did the music with them on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, and I think is a huge very successful part of this movie. I do see in both Oh Brother and this that there is an added humanity in the music that really balances the stew of the Coen Brothers, for me at least. Because it is a cynical stew, and it might taste a little sour, to certain palates. Really, the result of this that makes this so believable, this music, it is that decision of casting Oscar, the T-Bone collaboration, and then of course they're able to get Justin Timberlake and all these people who are really singing, and that helps tremendously.
Something I loved about your essay, Steve, you were talking about how the songs have a real connection to the narrative, and like there's an actual correspondence between what's performed and then what's experienced by Oscar Isaac's character, and then all of that is deepened by the fact that we actually have Isaac being the one who's singing. Like you said, it's not just Alanis Morissette, singing over all of this. I was really touched by the way that you were talking about that in your essay, and like the depth of humanity that the movie has, like you said, for such a cynical and depressing and existentially like morose movie.
Yeah, I know. The when you think about Oscar Isaac, and I would love to talk to him and just like, what was your audition before this? He is living that life. If you look at his credits before this, it's like Law and Order, guest spots, and he is doing what Llewyn is doing. So you really feel that in his performance. And I don't know for a fact. Maybe he's from money and is living on a, was living on a big trust fund penthouse or something. I have no idea what his background is, but you do sense that he connects to this struggle in the music. And and that is the thing with integrating music into a movie, is that you can't have the music numbers be breaks where we sit and watch a show and then start the movie again. They have to flow. It's all one thing. The audience sees it as one thing. If you, the director, think of it as separate things, and now we're going to have a break for the movie, and now we're going to get back to the story, then it won't work. So, as I talk about in the essay, every song has some effect on Isaac, or Llewyn Davis in the movie. And most of it is it just makes him frustrated that he's not successful, and that these clowns are. And it's a real interesting mix. What it adds to their, the Coen Brothers, cynicism. What all this kind of genuinely beautiful music, though some of it has some camp to it, but it is, even when the sort of Peter, Paul, and Mary type trio of Carey Mulligan, even when they're singing, there's a certain level of camp to that, looking back through history. But, 500 Miles is a very beautiful song, and it's sung gorgeously. So you're sort of mixing that genuine beauty with our observation of Llewyn's cynicism as he's struggling to be a folk singer, a working folk singer. The other thing just that comes up in relation to that is I was watching, just as a point of comparison, because I think a lot of people have seen Oh Brother, Where Art Thou. You do see the difference of a performer who's not singing their songs. George Clooney is not singing those songs, and you can tell. But of course, it's a much broader comedy. And it doesn't ask you to identify emotionally with that character the way, Llewyn is really asking you to feel for this guy. And I think the Coens knew that, for this movie, this has to be authentic. We can't put George Clooney up there and have, whoever, the guy from the Lumineers or whoever, we can't stick his voice, behind there, we need authenticity here.
I think this film, it's just so funny to put against Intolerable Cruelty because it's just so not flashy. And one of my favorite parts about your essay, Steve, is how you wrote about movement in the film, and in particular you highlight how they track him in the train, and then there's the shots when he's driving by the exit to Akron where he could have gone and seen his child or not, and he decides not to, and then it's mirrored with when he sees Bob Dylan in the club for the first time. What stands out to you about the visuals and how they construct just motion?
I mean, the film in general is just a great example of like a really mature film artist, like in the sort of at the peak of their powers where they've pared down a lot. I mean, if you think, most people have probably seen, or film fans have seen Blood Simple or Raising Arizona, two, really impressive, debut features. And you just see how much more they do things with, 3 cuts where now they do things with 1 cut, one shot. Or, they were sort of famous for, and this is what you do when you're young. You want to sort of show what you know about the medium. You want to do new things. You want to conquer things. So there's that famous shot in, there are a lot of very bold camera moves that they're doing with, they're working with Barry Sonnenfeld, who went on to shoot the Addams Family movies and direct them. So they have that kind of adventurous sort of aggressive camera style where, like, there's that shot where the camera's going down the bar in Blood Simple and then kind of lifts up and over a sort of a guy who's drunk sort of on the bar and like keeps moving forward. they're really restrained here, but of course they have all the same feel for rhythm and movement as they did. They don't lose it. They don't sort of make something stiff. They're just getting more out of less, and it's very appropriate for the tone and mood of this movie, which doesn't whap you over the head in the same way as some of their earlier films. And the whole beginning of the film with his sort of, pursuit over getting money and rent and paying back people and doing all the kind of haggling you have to do when you're broke in New York City. The way they film that, the movement of that, his commute on the train, showing the sort of the stations kind of whip by, they really understand how to make his work outside the stage feel like music and feel like music you don't want to spend a life doing. The drudgery. It's very hard to do drudgery without making the audience feel you want to communicate drudgery without the audience feeling like, please get me out of here. You want to communicate that he wants to be up there where things flow and things are easy and feel natural, but you don't want the audience to actually feel like, oh my God, this movie is so dull and slow. It has a great feel. It has a kind of drive to it with him running around all over the city. And then it also makes these great spaces for the performances, so that because you're in constant motion outside the performance, when he sits down and actually just plays, and those things are all shot very simply, all those performances, not always in one take, but very simply, so that it opens up space for you to really just hear the song. And now because we've been moving around so much, we're now kind of open to listening to the song. And we actually can now listen to the lyrics. We can look at his performance, what he feels about what he's playing. It's a beautiful presentation of that music.
No, I mean, you capture it really well when you talk about this contrast between like movement and stillness. And I think it's really is a testament to their filmmaking, because one of the things, at least from a narrative level, that I was struck by is that, he has almost kind of a passive or a reactive life.
Yes.
It's, when he makes that choice to not see his child, it's a choice on one hand, but he's so beaten down by everything. There's just this, it's like it's not a choice.
Yeah.
It would not be possible for him to make in his position, he doesn't have the ability to really make that choice or to really do anything other than to just react to the various situations that he gets himself into or that are imposed upon him.
Well, it's one of the things, as watching these films in the last couple of weeks, I rewatched a bunch of their films. You do see they have this philosophy they're working out that really has to do with, whether there is reason, whether there's free will. They don't exactly have an answer. They're working it out. And this film is very much in keeping with that. Like, are we prisoners of timing? Or do we have free will? Do we have agency over what we're doing? And are we in charge? Or is this all some kind of cruel cosmic joke? They are kind of impish philosophers, the Coen Brothers, and that's there in Intolerable Cruelty, too. The way things kind of interact, their interest in serendipity and coincidence and things wrapping around and biting you in the ass, and but then also turning out in your favor. But, moments like that I find are very resonant in their work, where you have these things slide. They like those shots of like things sliding by, you know, as if you're on a track and you'll never quite get it. And that's, you know, going past, he finds out, the plot is he finds out he has a kid in Akron, but he's not in a position to really go visit the kid or something. He has to get back, not really emotionally in the position or financially in the position. He's driving someone else's car, and he just watches Akron sort of slip by. And they do that with these, you know, moving shots, just seeing that light in the distance kind of drift on by. And it's mirrored again there when he's about to go get beaten up in the alley. And he passes, right at the end of the film, he looks over and he sees Bob Dylan on the stage. And Bob Dylan, of course, in that folk scene, is going to be the big hit. And he's going to be the also-ran. And you just see that sort of sliding doors of like different lives just kind of pass by. And it does give you, what I think is interesting about it is visualizing whether we have choice or we're on a track, but it does it in a way that really makes you feel a sense of loss or longing. So it's taking a very high-level intellectual idea, philosophical idea, and it's actually putting it into something that you have some feeling for. Like, oh, there goes Bob Dylan. I'm not going to be Bob Dylan. I'm going to be the guy who opened before Bob Dylan, you know, and that everyone forgets, you know. And anyway, you see that over and over. I mean, it's even there in, you know, in No Country for Old Men. I mean, the thing that really, I remember when I saw that movie in the theater, that when the Harvey R. Bardem character gets in that traffic accident that kind of comes out of nowhere, you know, just suddenly sort of, is there reason to something, or does something just happen? Are you in charge, or are you just at the mercy of a uncontrollable sort of connectivity of cause and effect? You know, it's very rare that you can actually translate ideas like that. It takes a lot of skill as a filmmaker to be able to turn kind of a philosophical idea into an actual living, breathing film.
And to do it at the level of form, like you're saying, with shots, or even in Intolerable Cruelty, like with genre and with noir.
That's right.
Playing with the serendipity of Marilyn coming back into Miles's life, or just the existential dread of noir and not knowing if you have control over your life. I think you're right.
They're not doing it in dialogue. You know, the Linklater way is the way, you know, most people do it. They're actually making living, breathing films that are kind of philosophical theories put into action. You know, they're dramas. They're not solutions. They're dramatizing these questions. You know, and I find it really interesting. You know, No Country for Old Men being one of the most powerful one. A movie with very little dialogue, really.
Yes.
A very spare. A lot of just struggle. Like Llewyn, a struggle. Movement and struggle.
So in your essay, Steve, I loved how you put it. You just said, this film grinds us into folk.
Yeah.
I love that term.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I thought about that because, I mean, I don't have any background in folk music, or, I mean, in listening. I mean, actually I do, I guess. As a kid, we listened to Peter, Paul and Mary. It was the first concert I went to, and they also loved the other guys, the Kingston Trio, who were the other kind of big popular folk act that, you know, would have been, you know, people that Llewyn would have really hated because they were like selling records that my parents were buying. But the movie prepares you. It turns you into the audience that is ready to hear this, you know, by putting you physically into his toil of trying to make a living. You then become the folk, the regular people, the working people. And now you can hear these sort of, by the end of the film, you're listening to a sea shanty on an ordinary day, I'm not ready to listen to a sea shanty. Like, you have to grind me down and sort of get me in the right mood so that I can maybe understand a timeless tale of struggle, you know? You're not always in the mood for that. And I think they did an even better job than they did in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou for that. Mm-hmm. You know, that movie is much more stylized and dips much more into the grotesque than this one. And so I really am able to enter, you know, those songs, even though songs of, you know, three folk singers who are in these like laughable cable knit sweaters, you know, singing some like song. There's one song, the one that goes jingle jangle, you know, Irish folk song that's just like, what is this thing? But you get into it. You can get into it because they have grinded you and prepared you, both rhythmically by sort of having something that sort of opens up and suddenly it's almost like you're in a clearing and there's a song, you know, and you're ready to hear it now. But also emotionally kind of preparing you to be in the right sense. And then also connecting it to the narrative. So then you're looking at what Llewyn's reaction is to it. And that he's hurting deepens your understanding of these songs of suffering.
I was really blown away by the supporting cast in this film. I mean, Adam Driver obviously steals the spotlight.
Yes, he does.
I mean, that's just such a great role.
Very funny.
But, I mean, even Carey Mulligan just being the foul-mouthed ex-girlfriend, she cracked me up. But all these other musicians who appear in the film just bring another depth to it. But just the way he reacts to them gets progressively worse. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I do get it. I mean, being a filmmaker, you know, I think everyone who works in the arts, you have to struggle with that. Like, wait a second, they're getting a response I want. And, you know, so, and we all know we're not supposed to then yell at those people and say it's not fair, it's not. We all know that. But, you know, there's some part of you that does. And so I really identified with that. You know, it's a flaw that is quite relatable. It's dealing with vanity, you know, and a lot of the Coen brothers, you know, I mean, obviously George Clooney, and you know, he's whitening his teeth. They're observers of, you know, human flaw, and I think vanity is one of their real, I don't know, what do you say, bugaboos? Like, they really like. Yeah. They're going after that. They're going to expose that. But they do, especially in Llewyn Davis. I mean, they do it with a lot of humor in all of their movies. But in Llewyn Davis is probably, they do it with the most compassion, you know? Yeah. Because you do still stay with this guy, whereas you might leave some of the other ones.
I think that's such a great point, like their attention to vanity, because... You know, if you think about it, whether in Intolerable Cruelty or some of their other films, you know, the characters who are vain are sort of trying to control their worlds and like want to. It's not just, it's about physical appearance and sort of performance and recognition and all of that, but they want to carve out a space for themselves. And for a lot of their characters, we're supposed to see how ridiculous it is that they're trying to do that, and we're maybe not asked to sympathize with their vanity. But as you say, in Llewyn Davis, we are, because it is a relatable flaw, and it's true for artists, like you said. You know, it's true even for me, who I'm very far from an artist, but, you know, if somebody writes something really good, like an article or a book or something, I say, well, why didn't I do that?
Yeah, or worse,
why don't I get
if they write something very puerile and it's a big hit, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
It's and that's off, you know, what you know, he's dealing with too. You know, especially with that song, "Please, Mr. Kennedy," you know, don't send me into outer space.
I want to bring in another film here. Steve, for our October horror series, you wrote about Laird Krieger's Hangover Square, and it's about a composer who is trying to write basically his masterpiece, and it really captures, you know, up to the conclusion, the inner torment of being an artist. I'm just curious what you see as an overlap between those two films, because they're the two articles you've written for us.
I mean, in Hangover Square, you have you have the artistic struggle put into split personality, basically. He goes into these fugue states where he's very repressed in his regular life, and then, Mr. Hyde comes out and he murders people, basically. And he's triggered. What's great is he's triggered by abrasive sound, so essentially bad music. So maybe the Coen Brothers should do it. It's essentially Llewyn. It's Llewyn who is like suffering. I mean, the difference with Llewyn Davis is there's a split in Llewyn Davis too. The split is just between who he is on stage and his ability to be totally fluid and open emotionally and calm, versus his life off stage, which is very circular and jagged, and it's very it's him going around in circles essentially, but not just circles, but like windy things, winding around and figuring out, I'm right back where I started. So not a circle that he understands as a circle. But that's the split that film has to figure, and both of them are trying to figure out, well, how do we make a movie that puts the artistic struggle into an experience for the audience? And they're both interesting ways to do it. One is to actually have a character who's split, and then the other one is to sort of find a way to make the split more spatial, I guess. In terms of on the stage, but also not just spatial, but oral too. In terms of sound, that you've got kind of chaos and then order, and what it does is it gives you, the audience. I mean, when those music numbers start, there's a kind of natural pull towards them. Because it's settled, it's quiet, like he's no longer yelling. There is a kind of draw to the silence by putting us through the grinding into folk, as I talked about. One guy hears bad music and goes and becomes a split personality, and one guy hears bad music and you follow him as he suffers. And then you understand the beauty and release of his music better. Because you go through his struggle. They're just different kind of narrative structures to go after the same thing. I mean, the end, the final performance in Hangover Square, where he plays his his symphony in a burning building, and and is left there to die, and Llewyn Davis playing his last song, or playing his song to the big agent, the Albert Grossman figure played by F. Murray Abraham, and then he just says it won't sell. They're kind of similar deaths, that is really played as like death, in
Bob
Llewyn
Dylan
Davis
coming on after,
and Bob
too.
Dylan coming on. It's like death. They're both dealing with tragic music stories, that really end in death. And then, how do we deal with that? How do we tell those kind of stories without tipping into something that is just bleak and horrible? That's the art of tragedy. And what I like about this film is that there's a lot of beauty in the struggle, and that's not always there. I mean, there is a kind of beauty in something like No Country for Old Men, and really in Intolerable Cruelty too, and the humor and the color, and there is a kind of, but this really has something you can really grab onto, an expression of suffering that, when you think about it, Miles in Intolerable Cruelty is his expression, and the reason he's having a midlife crisis is his mode of expression is lawyering. He doesn't have a song to sing, and and then obviously in No Country for Old Men, they have no expression. Their expression is just doing their job well, but that involves killing people. This is just a rare film for them because it has that real space. I was sad that it didn't kind of get embraced more, and I always, you always have to look at your own subjective, we talk about biases so often about sort of negative things, but of course I do recognize that this touched me because I'm a filmmaker. But as you said, Frankie, you're not a filmmaker, and you went along with it. I think
I was very moved by it. It's a very touching film.
Yeah, I think if certainly if anyone listening has ever found the Coen Brothers too sour or bleak, this is the movie to watch. This is their most open and compassionate film.
So one last thing I want to touch on. We've teased it, but we haven't really gotten into it. There's a scene portion midway through where they go on a trip to Chicago, and Llewyn's with John Goodman, he's a jazz musician, I believe, and his driver, who's a writer. And it's just this kind of miserable trip. But like you said, it's one of the most compassionate, or their most compassionate film. And I'm just curious how that factors into it for you.
Well, I just think it's really interesting. I mean, one of the, they do such a good job creating a kind of knot that he's stuck in the village. He goes from here to here to here, and it's like the more he travels, the more the knot cinches, and he's trapped. And then he gets to go out on the road, out to Chicago, and yet they keep the knot tied. Like he's stuck in a car, and in the back of him is John Goodman, who's playing a heroin-addicted jazz artist who really turns his nose up at Llewyn's simple chord progressions of folk music. And then a kind of like zip-lipped, like will not talk assistant to John Goodman's character, who I think plays like a frustrated novelist or something, and has only a few lines of dialogue that are like moments from his unpublished novel or something. So he's basically in a car with two frustrated artists, and trapping him in like that, and then putting him on the road and opening up all those landscapes. And one of the, visually, I think one of the things the Coen Brothers are really drawn to is they go out into America, and they take advantage of the spaces that we have here. And I think their most famous films, they stick with you. Fargo, obviously, in North Dakota. No Country for Old Men, which was shot in Marfa, or outside of Marfa, out near Alpine and in that area, out in way West Texas. They use that space to kind of open up and get you into kind of contemplation. And it does do that. Like, you start, instead of being tied up in all his sort of, I got to get this money to this person and this, it kind of opens up, and you start sort of thinking more about what he's thinking, which is, what am I doing? What's the point of all this? It opens up like that. And then at the same time, John Goodman's character is kind of heaving along, and like his career, like Llewyn's career, just heaving and spurting. And there's a great scene with this set they built of a bathroom. It's this vast bathroom. So even the interior spaces, they make sure to make them all these vast spaces. And John Goodman kind of is collapsed there on the ground, and he's like drooling he's kind of foaming at the mouth, and Llewyn comes out and is like, Jesus, what's going on here? But you really see in the way that he reacts that, Llewyn is like looking at his own soul here, spitting and on the floor. And the assistant just comes out and like it's just like no problem at all, just like helps John Goodman up like this happens every day. We didn't know that he was a junkie until then, and so now it sort of kind of comes together. Oh, this is sort of the artist's life. This is like standard operating procedure. And so that journey becomes like Llewyn really looking at his ghost of Christmas future, and he's like, what the hell am I doing? And it's very, you really feel for him, because then he gets to Chicago, he has to beg for an audition. He plays his guts out. He plays what is my favorite song in the movie, The Death of Queen Jane. which is a song essentially about a woman, a queen, who is supposed to be giving, birth to the heir, and is in labor for 9 days. And if you've ever witnessed a long labor, it really hits you, and the connection between that and Llewyn's toil of trying to deliver these songs into the world, and then the in the song Queen Jane dies. They cut her open and then leave her dead on the table and take the heir. It's really tragic, and at the end of that song, Grossman says essentially, I don't think it'll sell. And it's really to go on that huge journey, all the way. It's as if he went to like a pioneer across the country, and then just to get it won't sell. It's really, really powerful. And then that, of course, whips him right back to the village, and then you really feel, my God, this person's trapped. They did it. They made the big push, and they're right where they started again. And I think most people, not just artists, but anyone who's ever tried to do something really hard, if you've tried to do anything that's hard, you've hit that point where you look up suddenly and you're like, I'm right back where I started. I remember when I got out of grad school, after that big push to go to grad school, and I kind of looked up and I was like, wait a second, I'm right back where I started. And, because you get out and you don't have a job, and I'm right back where I started. And I find they have a great feel for that kind of struggle. And the way they're able to kind of get the music then to carry that's to me what's so special about the film.
I mean, you had mentioned, we've been talking about also as sort of a side mention, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And that as a remake of The Odyssey. In a way, this is a remake of The Odyssey, is a remake of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Because I think even the cat's name is Ulysses, yeah. Right? Yeah. There's just this sense of like Odysseus does, he leaves home and then comes back, and there the circle, completing the circle is it's a good thing. And, he gets to come back and, sees his son all grown up, and that's not what happens in Llewyn Davis, yes, right? Yes. And I think if other filmmakers were tasked with that narrative, the F. Murray Abraham story, that scene would have played out very differently. Yeah. It would have been more successful. Yeah. We would have actually seen, Llewyn's kid, and there would have been some kind of completion of the circle. But it just keeps going, like you said. Yeah. There's no real homecoming. Yeah,
they're very good at using that journey structure. It's a pretty hard thing to get us invested in a journey that ultimately is about being stuck where you are. That's a tough story to tell, and they end up using the journey to really reinforce the futility, essentially, of his situation. And to do all that without really making a big bummer is really a testament to their abilities.
Right, and even in Intolerable Cruelty, there's a form of a happy ending. There's they might stay together. Who knows? You doubt it, but it's at least formally it is a happy ending. Mm-hmm. I don't think Llewyn Davis would hit anywhere. It wouldn't be as powerful as it is if they would have done Bob Dylan loves this guy and he's going to be the next star. Yeah. Having just that sadness at the end, just him bleeding on the street corner, is okay, they got the point across,
Yeah, and yet they give him that one little sort of funny line. He's sort of, the guy who beat him up is driving off, and he kind of waves to him and he goes, au revoir. They give him a little oddity. That's sort of like the inhaler the hitman has. They're always giving him just a little sort of somethings to get you kind of one little hop out of the gutter. It's an impressive film, I think.
All right, well, that covers Intolerable Cruelty and Inside Llewyn Davis. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Frankie, your essay, Till Death Do Us Part, The Vampiric Love of Intolerable Cruelty, is on Splitooth Media now. And Steve, The Music of Bad Timing, Joel and Ethan Coen's Inside Llewyn Davis is also available now. Thank you guys so much for doing this. It's been a blast to bring this show back, and I look forward to talking with you guys again.